This is incredible.
Such a great idea.
How did you come up with this?
It's practically genius.
I'm Lindsay McGuire.
And I'm Ryan Greaves. And this is Practically Genius, an original show from FormStack.
One thing I love about the innovators of the world is there's curiosity hardwired in them. This episode, I'm talking to an incredible guest who turned his curiosity about no code into not only a career, but also a community. Phil Lakin is the co-founder and CEO of NoCodeOps, the first community dedicated to operations professionals that are leveraging no code to reimagine the future of internal innovation. Literally, what better way to kick off season 6? I absolutely loved this conversation with Phil. It was energetic, passionate, and super tactical as he shared stories both good and bad of no-code implementations he spearheaded throughout his career. You'll walk away from this episode with amazing ideas for how you can guarantee buy-in for your next big innovative idea. Here's my conversation with Phil. Well, hello, Phil. Thank you so much for taking some time to join us on Practically Genius today.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So first off, this show is for innovators who are championing digitization within their organizations. So you are a champion of no-code tools. Can you tell our audience why?
Yeah, sure. So I was extremely non-technical when I got into the world of tech. I was actually an actor before I was in tech. Yeah, so like everything from like Law and Order and Gossip Girl to Kansas Tribeca Film Festival, and like I had like started a guerrilla marketing and promotions company that got acquired by one of our clients, and then went full time into tech. And yeah, they asked me to do a huge onboarding process and digitizing it, and I had did it all with what I then thought was called figuring stuff out. Now I know is no code. And when I found out that there were other people like me, I became a huge champion of it because within months I was able to build a process that saved the organization millions of dollars, gained a ton of revenue. And so I became a huge proponent of it, that if I could be dangerous with these things in a matter of months, I imagine people much smarter than me who were still not technical could do it even better and faster if they just knew what was out there. So became a big champion of it, and mainly for the very similar crowd, right? There's definitely makers and founders, MVPs and indie SaaS with this stuff, which I think is phenomenal. But there's also all these entrepreneurs out there that I really felt connected to. And that's why I started NoCodeOps, to find those other folks. And yeah, that's who I'm rooting for.
And you talk about just putting things together. So what you say that you didn't know these were no code tools. So in your head, what was connecting all these pieces together? What was it about the tools that you were sourced that made it accessible for you as, you say, a very non-technical worker, right?
Yeah. So basically the idea was I was working at Get, an Israeli-based Uber competitor, and they were our client that had acquired us. And they wanted us to figure out a way to go after all of the drivers where we could onboard them in the field, not necessarily in the office. And the whole process was based in pen and paper at that time.
Don't even get me started. That's a trigger word for me, sir. Okay, go on.
Yeah, it's a safe space. And so they had asked me to build a process that was both digital and could work in the field. And I said, great, that sounds incredible. To lead that project, what technical team do I work with? And they responded, no, you're in operations. You're your own technical team. Got it. That's when I started just like looking for solutions that I could patch together, and I didn't even know there was like a field for this stuff at that point.
And I know you mentioned that at the time you weren't aware that it was no code, that's what you're using. And what's interesting is we ran our research report last year talking about the rise of the no code economy, and we found out that actually a lot of people are in the same boat even today, where they'll say that they're not using no code tools, or they don't think they're using no code tools, but then when asked what tools they do use, they're actually using no code and just don't realize it. So when did you make that realization that these tools you were using that were built for a non-technical user like yourself were in this like world of no code? When was that realization?
Yeah, so I'd started seeing the term here and there, but I just thought it was kind of those three buzzwords to like charge clients more.
Right.
So I didn't really make anything. I was like, oh, that's an interesting name, but I didn't really make anything of it. What had happened was I was on Product Hunt one day. I just moved to Atlanta, where I am now, and had like knew nobody here. It's like starting fresh here. It was a bit before the pandemic had started, and I saw on Product Hunt there was a newsletter that came out called No Code Coffee, which every day was like a new tool, a new maker, and no code like resources. I thought, this is amazing, so I signed up for it. I'm loving it. I'm reading it every day. And then I find that the guy who's creating it lives in Atlanta. I reached out to him and I booked Calendly, and he kindly emailed me back saying, hi, can I ask what this meeting is about? And this is Michael Gill, right? Who's like huge in the no code space. And I'm like, yeah, I just love your newsletter. And I just am looking to make friends. Like, I'm just very honest, right? And he's like, oh, cool. I'm going to this meetup I got invited to in Atlanta of other no-code people. You want to come with me? And so, yeah, oh my God, absolutely. And that ended up being this like legendary group of no-code makers, including he and Drew, who's like the founder of Trends VC, and Whit and Ash from Bad Unicorn, and like KP went on to be the director of no-code at On Deck, and now Chapter One, and all these like incredible folks, like right before their big thing, we're all just meeting every Friday in person to talk about the stuff that they're working on. And I would go every single Friday. And that's how I like learned that it was a term and that people cared about it. And yeah, the rest is kind of history.
And why do you think people care about it? It's been really fascinating to watch the last probably 2 or 3 years to see this really turn from what you said, like an initial buzzword possibly, into kind of a trend. And now really I would say it's a movement. So why do you think people do care so much about no code?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that once you start playing around with the tools and exploring something, right? Typically, like for an operator, right, like someone at a company, the path to it is, I want to do this thing or I want to get this thing done. And so I go to a developer at the company. They're like, I always call it like they throw the dreaded roadmap word at you, right? It's like, you're never getting it. And then look for off-the-shelf software that doesn't do exactly what you need. So you want to kind of piece together yourself, and then you find that you can actually do this. And so you start playing around with it, and you realize in a matter of days, weeks, like you can be super dangerous with this stuff. And then all of a sudden you're like the go-to person at your company for this stuff, and you're the expert, and you went from just like needing a solution to now being like the go-to person at your company for this thing. And that is a very common pattern. And so I think that pattern's really to go from just like kind of being helpless in something to being super empowered that fast without needing to know the fundamentals of computer science or code, without having to ask for permission for things. That's a very powerful journey for people. And typically what I see is the first thing people do after a few weeks of the stuff, they're like, I need to teach this to other people. I need to spread the word about this. And I think that's what kind of snowballs the movement. It's all these people who were the underdogs who they didn't either have the time or the resources or energy to like really sit down and do a huge boot camp, but they just needed to get something done. And then all of a sudden they discover this superpower. And then they discover there's other people out there that like to do this stuff too, who aren't exactly solutions architects, but they're not product managers, but they're not project managers, but they're not program managers, but they're not developers, right? But they're like somewhere that does all of these things. So yeah, I think that's what gets people really excited about it. And there a lot of people are genuinely just inspired to show other people and provide that aha moment for other people as well. And I think that's kind of what keeps it going.
Yeah, really funny that you describe it that way, because we do a series called Practically Genius, which is a video testimonial series, not just the podcast. And we interview customers to talk about their FormStack story. And recently I've been hearing exactly what you're saying of the customers will come and talk about, I was able to learn it very quickly. I was able to spin up solutions. And now all these other teams are approaching me to do these things for them, because like you said, it really does empower you to take it into your own hands, and you don't have to rely on your dev team, your IT team, your engineering team. It really is what you called it, a superpower, right? It's that hidden.
I mean, randomly, FormStack was one of the earliest tools I used in the space when I was at Get, helping out the customer service team with a project. And we used form sort with like conditional logic, like a backend that connected to a Google Sheet. Form sort just coincidentally was like a very early tool in my journey, way before any other form tool in the space. So thanks for that.
Magic. And there was something you mentioned that I want you to talk a little bit too about. You mentioned Michael, and he was in the no code space, but also a CTO at the same time, which I think is a really fascinating point to talk about. Can you dig a little bit into why some of these more probably technical people are now even getting into the no code space and the no code field?
Why I think that a lot of technical people are gravitating towards this stuff is for a multitude of reasons. One, they're realizing there's certain things they don't have to do that they can faster with no code. Two, the platforms are more reliable and robust. So whereas stuff seems way too high level in abstraction or way too basic, they're like now pretty complex. I remember even when I was at Compass, I showed some of our engineers stuff I was doing in Zapier. They were like, oh my God, what? I think there's that level of credibility that's also happening. And I think that all levels of abstraction at the end of the day. Just going one step higher and making it more accessible for folks. I think there's a lot of engineers in the world that are not only seeing, okay, how certain parts of my stack can I move faster with, but they're also seeing, if I bring in no code early enough into this and know where it's going to fit in, and IT folks think this way too, maybe instead of making every little change myself, I can empower the operators on the team to do what they just need to do without me having to be involved every single time. And I'm technically more responsible, so I'll be a sponsor of this thing and put in the guardrails and understand the things that maybe they don't totally get about it and say, hey, like maybe we really shouldn't put PII there for this reason, or hey, let's use this authentication instead of that, right? But they're seeing that it's clearing their backlogs and getting less demand on them because honestly, the last thing like most devs at like a startup or a tech company want to hear is like, you get to build the internal tools, right? Isn't that so exciting? No, not at all.
And again, the time and the demand on those teams, we've used a stat in some of our content about how it's like 1% of the worldwide population actually does know how to code and can do those skills. And so think about that then brought into your little team, and like the time constraints there are crazy. But I think one thing that I'm hearing from what you just said is that no code almost enables to build some trust between those non-technical and or frontline teams and the engineering technical teams, yeah?
When done well. It can also backfire pretty hard.
There's always an asterisk, okay? There's always an asterisk. Yes. That's why we have episodes with Drew Weiss about talking about implementation and how to go through digital transformation correct. But it sounds like, though, at the end of the day, it's that give and take and that pull and push, and it's enabling those people who are, for lack of better words, those boots on the ground people who are handling the customers, they're talking to the employees, things like that. They're given more power to this is a cheesy way to say it, but control their destiny, right?
Yeah, well, it's the CX folks that are on the ground, right? That know better than anybody else what needs to happen. Ask any frontline CX person the 5 things their company should be doing that they're not currently doing, and those are probably going to be the most accurate things from a certain perspective. They really know. They're talking to customers every day. Same with the salespeople, right? So I think a lot of the times we ignore the fact that internal users are users also. And with the level of sophistication we interact with on a daily basis with B2C consumer applications that are beautiful and so easy to use and so intuitive, and we get to work and we're dealing with like stuff that looks like DOS still, that's really frustrating. That's like really frustrating.
If we have any younger listeners, that might go over their head, but I got it.
It's important that like we treat people internally like real users. And I think that no code is a huge opportunity for those who are new in tech, right? Who are non-technical, that are on the phones in CX. They're a salesperson. They're working in HR as like a people or recruitment coordinator. They're on the data team as an analyst, right? Like they're on like mid to entry level position in a certain non-technical department. I always like to say to those folks, like, talk to your manager and see what some challenges are that like aren't being solved by your technical team. Talk to your fellow staff and find out what those are, and like get buy-in. If you could get like 20% time to just like come up with some solutions that you can use dummy data for, you'd be very surprised how fast promotions come after that.
Once these frontline employees or these people in the non-technical departments get the discovery of no code, then how can they go about getting buy-in from their organization, whether that is from their leader, their senior leader, their C-suite, and go probably a lot of places. Some of your advice for getting that buy-in?
Awesome question. And it's one of the things that's like skipped over a lot in talking about this stuff. Because like when you're a small company, like you're a little startup or you're a freelancer or whatever, right? And you're the decision maker, the procurement team, all the things, like you can just make these decisions. But when you're at a bigger company, just go.
Yep.
But when you're at a bigger company, yeah, there's a process to go through. And I like to do a combination of like getting buy-in and also forgiveness versus permission a little bit, because it's what I find
You
important.
rebel.
Yeah. But it has to work. So here's the way that I recommend people go about this, and it's the way that I've gone about it. One is you start to have those conversations that I just mentioned earlier, right? Where's the biggest pain points? Because if you build something your manager or your department or your coworkers don't care about, good luck getting traction. So I think there's that. I think 2 is finding the intersection of those things plus the thing that you're passionate about and curious about and like want to solve for. Because I think that entrepreneur spirit, that extra mile really takes off when you're passionate about this stuff. And so I'd say looking at the intersection of the next thing is I do like to talk to IT to just understand very early what's completely off the table. Anything I'm looking at need to be SOC 2. Does anything I need to look at, need to have a SO or else it's a no-go, right? So where are those major things? And typically like a more mature IT department or procurement department will have like a checklist of like must-haves, nice-to-haves, et cetera. So just not asking them for input quite yet, but just asking what are the boundaries. The next thing I then like to do is just get experimental and start playing with stuff. Look for solutions. Don't put together a whole presentation. Don't waste your time with presentations and bullshit RFPs. You know what I mean?
Or the slide deck. Let it go.
Ugh, right? Just go out and play with stuff. Most things are product-led growth today. And if they're not, you can leverage your company's name typically to like get a free trial or just get in the tool. Right? But just find things, play with them. Look on G2, look on Capterra, look on Product Hunt, look in forums like Capiche. Come to the NoCodeOps community and ask about it, right? Like just start looking for things that meet these needs and play with them. The next thing is just bringing in dummy data and just running experiments and setting up workflows. Because what I like to do, I don't like to do presentations when it comes to presenting to my manager. I like to just be like, open your phone. This is what a text message from our new system would look like. Here's the background. Let me show you. You want to make a change? Let's do it together and show you how fast that could go. And that's what gets people excited. I mean, I remember we literally signed, like a six-figure contract for SaaS at Compass because the VP in my presentation meaning showing him what we had built, got a text message and it was beautiful and just said, yep, money, you got it. This is amazing. Now, the other thing I'll say is, you will be the foremost expert of this stuff in your company when you're going over all of these solutions. You will know better than most what's going to work, what's not going to work. However, if there's a lot of people in your department, it doesn't necessarily mean you should make the decision alone. Even when you have buy-in, I think it's important to involve other stakeholders in specific ways from the community of users that are eventually going to use the product every day. Because I've found that users internally don't like just being like, here's the tool, now you have to use it. They want to buy in along the way. They want to be a part of it. They don't want to be every part of it, but they want to be a part of it to a certain degree. And so one thing we did at Compass on this front was when I knew the solution that I wanted to use and I got that buy-in from the VP, I said, great. He goes, cool. So are you going to implement it now? I said, absolutely not. I said, we're going to take 1 month where one team uses this and 2 other teams use things that they're already working on locally for a month. And then we're going to have a demo day where people show off their solutions to the 150 people in our department. And then I'm going to let them vote. And he's like, are you out of your mind? You know this is the best one. No, but one or two things is going to happen. Either they're going to vote for it and prove that I was right, or they're going to vote against it and prove that, like, you know what, I was actually pretty wrong. And good thing we didn't spend a lot of money on this thing. And that was the highest EMPS score we ever received, ever in the history of the company.
That is probably one of the most practically genius ideas anyone has shared on this show. It's mind-blowing. You wouldn't be able to do that if you didn't have no-code tools, because it would be too much of an investment to get it spun up. Way too long, way too much time, investment, brain power, people. But the fact that no-code exists, you can do things like this and have that more, I want to almost say like a creative element to pitching new tech and showing solutions that you can make. And it's just that
hands-on with it so much faster. And that's really important.
Talk a lot about tech implementation on the show, but no one has ever positioned in it that way of, even if I know what I think is the right tool, I want those people who are in it every day to be able to make that decision. And I don't want to be the one to force it on them, right? Yep. Yeah, that is, wow. A pro tip, A+.
I only learned that from doing it the wrong way a bunch of times first. So yeah.
Right. So what is it about the no-code tools that really like stokes people's fire to learn?
The short amount of time between inspiration and impact. That journey with no-code is so short that it propels you wanting to do it more and more and more and more. Like the second you see that first Zap work and that row of data magically appears in your Google Sheet, there's just this feeling of like, what else can I do? That's so powerful. That's a massive thing for folks. And so I think it's that magical moment. And that magical moment doesn't go away. It becomes bigger over time because you're doing more and more complex things. And it feels accessible. I like, back in my acting days, where a professor of like scenic design, right, in college. And he said this thing that always stuck with me in like every career path I've ever been in, which he said, the best sets, the best designs are those that have a low bar for accessibility, but a high bar for discoverability. And I think the same is true for just so many things. And that's why no code's incredible to me, because like the accessibility is so low. You get started in 10 minutes. But the discoverability is so high.
I think that is what has lit this movement, if you want to call it, on fire, is the fact that it is so accessible and things almost limitless. And I think even on some of your NoCodeOps stuff, you use the term make the impossible possible.
Yeah.
And I think that is really the catalyst of why this is such an important thing to talk about, is that you don't have to be stuck in these either legacy tools that have been around for decades and have not gotten any easier to use or upkeep or create new stuff with, but you also don't have to take the route of going into a highly technical tool that you really need to have an IT or a dev person alongside you on that journey.
Or be in a boot camp that takes you offline for 6 weeks. Not everyone has that ability or luxury either, right? And so no hiding that sometimes no code is a gateway to low code, which could be a gateway to code. That happens all of the time for folks. But even when you don't go that route and you just stay in the world of no code, you're still the most dangerous person in your org with this stuff. Sometimes you become the MacGyver of your team. Like Compass literally created a role for me because it was that impactful. I became the first solutions architect at the entire company to work across all the operational teams that were non-technical to help consult on no-code solutions. That's how powerful it became.
So how can people listening now try to instill that same thing within their own organization? I think, especially like we were talking about, there's so much out there for like entrepreneurs and solo people and startups in the no-code space, but it's really limited when you get talking about maybe those more enterprise organizations and those larger orgs. But how can they do that same idea and bring that focus into, it's not only finding these champions in a department level, but those champions across your org and bringing on, I hate to use the word digital transformation, but let's be real, that really is what it is.
Yeah, I think, first of all, signing up for the NoCodeOps weekly newsletter that's free and signing up for our community, which is also, we have a free version of it in Discord. Come hang out with your people, right? Like, we can't wait to meet you and jam on this stuff. If you find an interest in this stuff and you're playing around with these tools, just know that sometimes the first project you do at your organization isn't necessarily the sexiest or the most interesting to you, and that's okay, because once you get a little bit of credibility internally to your name, you then get to do that stuff. So be open-minded a little bit into the first thing you really get to flex your no-code muscles on, and especially if it's connected to a current AR or KPI that is really important to your manager or your team. I remember like at Compass, I came up with this idea I was so excited about early on, but like, no one cared about it, right? And I was like, but this could make money for us, and it's like we're leaving money on the table, and this thing is so interesting. And I was like, yeah, it's just not connected to anything we really care about. It's got to make somebody else look good in an organization. And when you can find that magical thing, if it makes somebody else look good, I care enough about it, there's actually a no-code solution out there to help support it. That's where the magic begins to happen, and you start building, I think, momentum. I also think there's this idea of like extreme ownership and like really just owning something top to bottom, waiting, not being aggressive, going after it, but also not having sharp elbows. Sometimes people will get freaked out with no code. It's like, wait, if you're automating all this stuff, like what happens to my job? And that's like a real thing.
It's a real fear. Yeah, it's a real fear for people.
Oh yeah, like when we were saving on average 2 hours a week for our experience team for these 150 people across the US, a lot of people's first question were like, well, what's going to happen to my job if it's this efficient? And the reality is that you got to kind of like this stuff, like we'll have more time for higher value activities. That's the idea of this stuff. And by the way, we can co-create some of this stuff together. It's not just going to be in a vacuum. Like unlike the dev team that's interested in the product, not necessarily internally into operations, like my interest is to help you directly keeping up that level of communication, keeping up that level of user interaction and user interviews, and, not being scared to find out, wow, we messed that one up. Like really staying on top of it remains very important throughout the whole journey.
Yeah, and the fear part of it is very interesting because in our State of Digital Maturity report that we produced this year, we actually found out the average worker is spending at least 2 hours per day on repetitive and manual tasks. And it's always that idea of just think about the things that you could do that only, of course, the conversations are happening of like, and all these things too. It's like, but think about the things that you as a human being, as an individual contributor within your organization can do and can contribute if you just had those 2 hours of focus time back. Talk about what you've seen work at those enterprise level orgs. How have you seen no code transform those larger organizations? And what are even some maybe common either pain points or use cases you see them tackling through no code?
I'm starting to see this idea of like the data mesh evolve more and more, which is like treating data as a product and multiple departments owning their data in a decentralized capacity and sharing it with each other in like a regulated fashion. But the other thing I'm seeing, which is really interesting, and there's even a course from Project Management Institute, he created the PMP, famous for certification in project management, a whole course around citizen development. And what's happening is these larger organizations are even getting more formal with this, and it's not so much bottoms up, but it's actually coming tops down, which they're saying like, we need to empower people to innovate more. So let's actually create a citizen development like program where there's stages to development, where the IT and operations teams are working together under maybe a director of innovation or something to just like fast build and prototype and, and add more support to projects as they go along. And that's why PMI now even has a citizen development course, and you hear more of the term citizen development. And I love it because it's pretty tool agnostic. So I think we're seeing like that happen more and more, where like bigger organizations are hiring head of rapid development, head of process improvement, that are very much empowering not themselves to build these things, but their literal job is to set up the guardrails and empower other people in their orgs to use these tools to build these things.
Those ideas between being a larger organization, needing to ensure quality assurance essentially, but giving people of no code.
Yeah, so no code is a double-edged sword on that front for sure, right? On one edge, which is great, you get to move super fast. But on the other side, you move super fast. So sometimes we joke that no code's like the most fun power tool your kid ever played with, right? Like it's a little bit scary because like
I love that
damage here. And so the idea is, how do you make it so that both parties win, that T is happy and folks on the ground can do what they want? And that's literally the question and the thesis, like kind of question that like started Switchboard as a whole, right? Which is, we started Switchboard because we said, look, there's plenty of tools on the market. There's great form software. There's great data software. There's great software. There's great app builders. There's great workflow builders. We don't need to add to that any more than there is, unless you're getting, of course, hyper verticalized, right? But like those are actually like Airtable's pretty great. FormStack's pretty great. Zapier's amazing, right? These things exist. Great. Okay. The next level of maturity is, if people are going to use multiple tool stacks, which we don't see going anywhere, how do you make sure that one, you have a level of infrastructure in place that enables the operators to move faster, not only with the people they're building for, their business stakeholders, but also IT and devs who want to get involved also. And our thinking is that, look, there's definitely tools in the market that like look at no code from a perspective of how do we lock this thing down, right? From like it's like mainly from an IT perspective. And I think it's very interesting, shows that there's maturity in the market and that there's a need for it. But I think don't tie no coders' hands behind their backs until you've empowered them. And so that's why we started from like the idea of monitoring for operators, not for IT. Automatic documentation and process mapping for operators, not IT. We will get to a place eventually where we invite IT and devs into the platform and even share data with their platforms of record in a really interesting way that is helpful to them. But where we really stand out is we really care about the operator first in their experience. And because of that, one, we'll get a level of buy-in that's really high, hopefully. Two, we'll get context that better informs IT and devs how to make decisions about these things. So instead of saying we need to get rid of Zapier, it's like, don't use a sledgehammer or use a scalpel. Like, let's look at why this thing happened. And maybe in the future, we set a policy where if PII goes through this thing that we told you it shouldn't, we get a notification, we have a conversation about it. Not just let's shut it down. Or let's have the renewal conversation about Zapier. It's costing us all this money. Let's get rid of it. Well, actually, look, it saved us $300,000 in person hours and has our entire sales onboarding experience in it. So are you sure you really want to do that? those conversations can't happen as well today because these things exist across multiple platforms. And so I think bringing visibility into that and treating the no-coder like an architect and not just the first iteration of what we've become in the operations world, which is just like this scrappy MacGyver get things done person, really start to evolve that conversation of, okay, you are an architect, not only empowering yourself, but empowering others.
Well, Phil, this has been a phenomenal conversation, and I think you have brought up so many strong pointers about why we can no longer ignore no code, no matter what size of org you're in or what role you're in. So I have two final questions for you. So the first is, why should innovative leaders care about no code?
Because if you don't care about it, your people on the ground are going to. Like the internet and Google are like free for the most part, right? So like they're gonna find out about this stuff, and it's gonna be shadow IT. Yeah, they're gonna get there on their own, and they're gonna talk to people like me who like are very crazy, right? So they're gonna do this stuff. So work with them, not against them. When it comes to innovation, your job is to empower folks, not to just limit things. We live in a world with these tools are so advanced that people can move really fast while also doing things in a correct way. And like you can set up centers of excellence. And I know that stuff takes more work in the beginning to do, but man, the output of it is just so much higher than you could ever get. And by the way, let's not even like get to the fact that employee retention goes through the roof in a positive way when people actually give a shit about what they're doing and they're passionate about it, because the 20% of the job doing the no-code stuff, a rising tide affects all boats, right? So, let it happen.
I think that's the best way to kind of wrap this whole conversation up. Thank you so much, Phil. This has been a pleasure having you on Practically Genius today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us for this great conversation with Phil. I'm taking away tons of insights from this conversation and applying them to our Practically Genius Insider newsletter, which you should definitely sign up for. Each month, I'll dig into how process, people, and technology combine to fuel the future of work. Just a little bit of a spoiler, it makes you much more productive. You can subscribe now by clicking the link in the show notes. And as always, please rate, review, share on LinkedIn, and tell another innovator about the show. You never know, you might just get your next Practically Genius idea right here.